Hey there, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack something that literally shapes every single classroom, every test, and honestly, every learning experience you've ever had. We're looking at how different philosophical perspectives completely change the game when it comes to testing students. Okay, let's start with a quick question. Think about your smartphone. You probably use it every single day, right? But how did you actually learn to use it? I mean, did you sit down and read a giant manual? Probably not. We all figured it out differently. And this relatable little mystery proves a massive point right off the bat. Learning isn't just one monolithic thing. It doesn't happen the exact same way for all of us. Okay, let's dive into this. When you really look at how people answer that smartphone question, you start to see some distinct patterns. For some of you, it was all about repeated trial and error. Just tapping things until they finally worked. Pure repetition. Others probably just looked at the screen, recognized a familiar layout, and relied on pattern recognition. And then a lot of you probably just applied what you already knew from an older phone, prior experience. So how you answer this actually reveals some deeply fundamental learning processes at play. And that brings us to the absolute core thesis of today's explainer, which is captured perfectly in this quote: assessment follows the path of learning. The crucial takeaway here is that however an educator defines how you learn, well, that dictates exactly what and how they're going to assess you. If you change how you understand learning, the test itself absolutely has to change. So here's our roadmap for today. We just wrapped up the learning mystery. Next up, we're putting on 3 different philosophical lenses: behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism, before wrapping it all up with the integrated classroom. Let's jump right into our first lens, behaviorism, and observable performance. Popularized by famous thinkers like B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson, behaviorism is rooted in something called empiricism. This is basically the view that knowledge comes purely through sensory experience. To a behaviorist, reality is entirely external and observable. All those internal mental processes, the stuff happening inside your head, well, they're either totally discarded or just considered unobservable, so they simply aren't the focus. So, what does this actually mean for learning? Well, in the behaviorist view, reality just exists independently out there and it's completely observable. Knowledge, then, is simply a correct response to external stimuli. You get a stimulus, you give the correct response, and boom, that behavior gets reinforced. It's all about creating a relatively permanent change in behavior that we can actually see. Because knowledge here is strictly defined as a correct response, assessments in a behaviorist classroom are super straightforward. We're talking multiple choice questions, fill in the blanks, matching items, and oral drills. The teacher is basically checking for pinpoint accuracy and observable mastery. Assessment happens continuously in these tiny incremental steps, and feedback is immediate. The whole goal is just to prove you've mastered the objective before moving on to the next one. Moving right along to our second lens, cognitivism and mental understanding. But wait, what about all that stuff going on inside our heads? Let's do a quick mental exercise together. If you had to memorize a 9-digit number right now, how would you do it? Would you group the digits into chunks? Maybe mentally repeat them over and over? Or maybe you'd visualize some kind of pattern? Even though a teacher literally can't see you doing any of that, that internal organization is absolutely happening. You aren't just reacting to a stimulus anymore. Your mind is actively processing and encoding. Which brings us to the philosophical foundation of cognitivism, which is rationalism. Favored by influential thinkers like Jean Piaget and Jerome Bruner, rationalism argues that reason and mental organization play a massive, central role in how we acquire knowledge. So it's no longer just about what you sense with your eyes and ears, it's about how your amazing brain is actively organizing all that data. Now, what's really interesting is how cognitivists view reality compared to how the mind organizes it. For the cognitivists, reality still exists independently, sure, but it is mentally represented by the learner. So knowledge isn't just a correct reaction to stimuli anymore. Now, it's organized, encoded, and stored mental representations. It's really all about how you pay attention to the information, how you store it, and how you reason with it. Because of this massive shift, a cognitive assessment has to look for deep comprehension and logical reasoning. You're going to see essays where you have to explain your reasoning, concept maps to show how different ideas relate to each other, classification tasks, and complex problem-solving scenarios. You aren't just spitting out the right answer, you have to justify it. The teacher wants to get into your head, diagnose your actual understanding, and catch any hidden mental misconceptions. All right, on to our third perspective, constructivism and the construction of meaning. So, what if knowledge isn't just organized in your brain, but entirely built from scratch by you, the learner? Heavily influenced by thinkers like Vygotsky and Piaget, this lens treats learners as active creators, not just passive receivers. Think about this beautiful analogy for a second. Look at the clouds in the sky. What do you see? Take a moment. It's the exact same cloud for everyone, right? But if we asked a room full of people, we'd get incredibly different answers. Some people might say they see a bird, others might see a mountain, a face, or maybe even a boat. Even though every single person is looking at the exact same external reality, they construct completely different meanings. And why? Because of their prior experiences, their unique contexts, and their own personal perspectives. This whole idea is anchored in the philosophy of pragmatism. Pragmatism is basically the view where ideas actually gain their meaning through active experience, action, and practical consequences. Learning isn't just downloading facts into your brain like a computer. It's a messy, active negotiation of meaning based on real-world experience. So, the crucial point is this. Under constructivism, reality is encountered and experienced entirely through interpretation and context. Knowledge itself is an actively constructed meaning made by the learner. You literally reconstruct your own understanding through reflection and through social exchanges with others, meaning two learners can walk away from the exact same lesson, understanding it differently, and yet they are both still genuinely learning. When knowledge is something you actively construct, assessment stops being a test at the end and becomes an ongoing part of the learning itself. You'll see things like portfolios of authentic work, massive real-world projects, reflective journals, and open-ended performance tasks. And it's not just the teacher standing there with a red pen anymore. Continuous peer review and self-reflection are absolutely essential. The teacher, your peers, and you yourself all act as assessors, constantly working together to support that conceptual reconstruction. Let's move to and see how this builds into our final section, the integrated classroom. In the real world, no single perspective can fully address every classroom situation. A master teacher actually relies on a synthesis of all three of these lenses. Notice how what's valued completely shifts across the board. Behaviorism is all about accuracy and observable mastery. Cognitivism pivots to understanding and logical reasoning. And constructivism values meaning-making and authentic, real-world application. Even the role of the assessor shifts. It goes from mainly being the teacher in behaviorism to the teacher plus the learner's explanation in cognitivism, all the way to a full collaborative effort between the teacher, the learner, and their peers in constructivism. Of course, we have to be real here. Each approach has its merits, but also its limitations. Behaviorism is fantastic for drilling basic skills and getting immediate feedback, but let's be honest, it can feel a bit mechanical. Cognitivism really deepens that conceptual understanding, but since internal mental processes are completely hidden, it's a lot harder to measure. And constructivism, it's highly authentic and links learning to your actual life, but it can be super time-consuming and pretty subjective. Ultimately, a truly skilled educator draws from all three perspectives to see and support the whole student. Which brings us to the end of this explainer. But before we go, I want to leave you with a question to ponder about your own educational journey. When you look back at how you learn best, which perspective seems closest to meaningful learning for you? Is it mastering observable skills, organizing complex thoughts in your mind, or constructing your own authentic meaning? Really think about it. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you next time.